So when someone joins a research study or even shares their information so they can hear more about research, they really want to be sure that only the people that they want to hear from will contact them. So that's one aspect of confidentiality. The second aspect is in the context of research, we're often trying to ask very personal questions about one's health and about one's background. And they are important to doing the research, but they're not necessary for the rest of the world to know. And we really want to have confidence that this information isn't being broadly shared. So I think both confidentiality and privacy are the real issues that people think about when they sign up for something. One of the things that many people do is they require that incoming information comes from trusted sources. During the pandemic here in New York, we often had a difficult time reaching out to people when our staff were at home calling from their personal cell phones. So we quickly decided that what we would do is send to them information and say, you tell us when you want us to call you. You can leave your information on our safe website, medical website, or on our safe telephone line, and we will send you information saying what number will call you back. So you'll know exactly who it is and not simply have many different people reaching out to you or an unknown number reaching out to you without any additional information.
That's all TV, and it's all highly illegal, and that doctor would be in big trouble. So
right, but the more interesting plot line is about breaking confidentiality of test results to know if someone's getting a treatment in a trial, and you just see that plot line over and over again.
So the thing is that when something is blinded, we don't know what it is.
But talk to me about unblinding.
That's only done by the sponsor of the study of the trial, because we don't know. They give us a placebo and the drug that looks identical. So there's no way, even if I wanted to, that I could find out because I don't have access to that information.
So if our CRL is Dion and is talking about how confidential information is kept, I mean, I think there's a reasonable assurance that it doesn't look like what you see on television.
That's usually made by non-scientists for entertainment purposes. But in the real world, confidentiality is a very important piece of what we do, and we don't take it lightly. So anybody who breaks it loses their job, and they jeopardize the entire project. The point of informed consent is to make sure that the participant understands the study, the indication for it, and what it involves. But it also lets the participant know that the investigators and the study team respect them, will make sure that everything that is being done is going to be based on their safety and their privacy. So there are two parts to informed consent. It's what the patient understands, and it's also what the investigators and the study team promise to do. I think at the point of a community conversation, it's more about the relationship building and the trust and being able to answer questions so that people feel comfortable. I find that if you spend your time getting into details of all of language and things, sometimes that puts people to sleep and they don't quite connect. So I like to meet people where they are and figure out what their needs are, what their questions are, and answer them at that time.
How do you talk about consent with community groups?
There are several aspects. I think I try to tell them that the only way to have confidence in consent is to work with people you trust. And I encourage them to build trust by asking questions, both when they sign and any time in the future. I also remind them that any decision they make can be changed at any time. I think that's an important aspect. I think uh, it's also important to remind them that informed consent is the process by sharing all of the information that most people think is important, but that they also have the right to ask for more information is not always realized in the moment. And I think that while we may actually want to encourage people to have openness about the things they're concerned about and about their health, I don't think that everybody has that openness. And so it's important to make decisions and have realization about what the breadth of shared information can do.
Well, when our CRL is out at that community meeting, they're likely to hear uh, people's personal stories that include healthcare information, and others might hear that as well. What are your suggestions to the CRL about how to handle this carefully?
That's a great question. I think when the CROs get this personal information from someone, and in particular when they're asked for feedback or to pass it on, it's always good to begin the conversation with, can I share your situation with someone? That tells people that you are actually asking on their behalf. And so they can know that they've been asked and know that they can say, no, I'm not ready to talk about this. And that can allow the liaison to realize, okay, I have to pass on more general information to get you what you need. On the other hand, if there's willingness to share more detail, you might be able to pass on more specific information. And the other important uh, opportunity would be to put individuals directly in touch with each other. Often when I'm asked for a referral, I'll put the person directly in touch with a person who could give them more information. And then I'll step away and let them make the decisions about how much they want to share.
Confidentiality is important because people tell us important information that we need to know in order to either take good medical care of them or to make sure that they are responding appropriately in a study. And this is information that we consider private. It is not our story to tell, and it really belongs to the patient, and we protect it very carefully.
Is there such a thing as a casual expectation of confidentiality? I mean, if I tell you where I grew up and where I went to college, I mean, is that the level of casual conversation that we're worried about confidentiality? Are there degrees of concern about information that's shared?
So there can be degrees of information shared, but in order to avoid any concern or ambiguity, it's better not to talk about anything. It is better to leave the conversations that are held in a medical environment or in a research environment confidential. We live in a world right now with social media where people are posting everything. They tell you what they ate, what they said, the fight they had with their husband, all of that stuff. And none of that is appropriate in a research setting. So if you wanted to take a selfie picture, you should not think that you can take a selfie of a participant in a research study and post it. Or if a research participant tells you something that you think is funny, you can't put that on your Facebook page. So in other words, in order to keep it clear, it's just better to consider anything they tell you off the record that you cannot repeat.
So if I'm out at a community event talking about participation in research, give me some guidance about the person that walks up to me and said, my mom has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and I think she'd be really interested in your study. Walk me through, how do you handle that with a confidentiality perspective?
So if I was in a public setting, I would not get into any details about the patient's mother or her name or her age or her diagnoses or any medication she's taking. It's okay for someone to say, I would like my mother to participate in your study. And clearly, if you're in a community setting and you're talking about a study that involves Alzheimer's disease, it's reasonable to assume that's what the subject is. However, at that point, I would refer that person to our clinical research associates so that they can determine if that person is eligible, and they would do so under a confidential setting. And I think as the healthcare professional or the community research liaison, you should not start that personal conversation. You can't control if somebody comes up to you and starts it, but you can kind of put a damper on it and help direct that person to an appropriate place for that conversation, or refer them to the setting that would best fit their needs for having that discussion.
People with thinking problems,
Right,
can people with thinking problems give their own consent?
right. I think people with thinking problems have to, in most cases, have to provide assent. They may not understand the complexity, for example, of a drug or a placebo, but they have to have enough ability to say, I agree that I'm willing to do the process recommended to me by this study and by the person who's providing consent.
Can you give an example of how informed consent protects the participant?
Well, one of the things I think it does is it ensures that they're in a program where new information will always be coming back to them. Informed consent, we always say, is a process. We always have new information, and we share the new information as best we can. So that's one important thing. The second thing is that the informed consent process spends a lot of time being sure you know exactly what you've committed to, how much time, where it's going to take place, who will know the information. And that's pretty well laid out in a consent form. So again, you know what the parameters are that you've agreed to.
And in cases of people with dementia who are considered vulnerable populations when we're talking about clinical trials, we should have this conversation not only with the participant present, but also their healthcare proxy who would be signing and making the decision for them.
Informed consent is not a self-serve process. It's not a, hey, go read this and get back to me, right?
Correct. So we have to, when we're reading the actual document, we have to read it word for word, because that document is usually approved by an institutional review board to contain certain information. So while you are going through the informed consent process, you have to read that document just as it's written. You can't take any shortcuts. You can't take anything out.
How do you explain inducement or rewards for participation in research?
So when someone participates in research, they actually spend quite a bit of time. And I think that compensating for that time is critically important. The concept of undue inducement often suggests that you're paying more than that time or that burden is worth. And I would say that particularly when we are looking for individuals who have certain conditions, though the likelihood that we're having undue inducement goes down, it really raises up when we're asking for a lot of time and a lot of energy from someone who has no specific medical condition, but is simply making a contribution of their time to a good cause. The question is the contribution of time overly compensated to get people who might feel coerced into joining such a study? Making the process easier, sending a card may be perceived as an inducement, but in fact, it's supposed to lower burden. So I think those kinds of things can often occur. One might simply say getting access to the clinical trial population would be an inducement. But again, I think in the context of the contribution of time, I would hope that that is seen as part of the partnership. The majority of the reason people participate in research, while it would be nice to do something for yourself, it's also to contribute to general knowledge. It's that altruism. And I actually ask families how committed their loved one would have been to doing something good for everyone. And very often that is more important to them than the outcome of the drug in their individual family member. I think that's a very big deal. Even when people can't make decisions, they can often say, I want to do something for someone else.
You know, most of my patients and their study partners are so interested in helping move the science and our understanding of Alzheimer's disease and dementias forward. They have not asked for anything really out there. Some of them say they don't really want any money. So there are nominal things that we often give, such as paying for parking, you know, transportation costs. There are some studies where people will get a gift card or something like that, but that's usually not the motivator. I find that people have a real desire to help and participate in moving our knowledge forward to help the general society and the greater good.